Hey everybody, it's Producer Jay. So today I'm taking a look at two different single stage triggers. One is the Geissele S3G. The other is a Spikes Tactical battle trigger. Now these are both triggers that, even though they're both single stage, that's really the only thing that they have in common. I mean, same basic design as far as function goes, but definitely different thought processes as far as what their intended use might be. Now, the S3G stands for Super 3 Gun, so the idea with this, or the philosophy behind this trigger, is to make for a really nice single-stage 3-gun competition trigger. And as such, it has a very light single-stage pull, and a fairly short but very positive reset. You can see the short reset there. Now the advertised pull weight on this was 3.5 pounds, and using my Wheeler trigger scale, which is of the very cheap springy type, no fancy digital here, I was able to consistently get 3.5 pounds on the measurement, which is it's actually almost scary how close this was, or how consistent this was at being 3.5 pounds. Now, comparing this to a Spikes battle trigger is really unfair to the point of being an apples to oranges comparison, or an unfair comparison, as I tried to say just then. But because they're basically very different on the price scale as well, and they're both single stage triggers, I thought it might be helpful to kind of pair them back to back, there's that word again, to show why you might actually want one over the other, and if one over the other is potentially right for you. And I'll kind of explain why I have each one as well, and then you can make it up your own mind. But I'm trying to kind of go through this to show people who may not have hands-on experience with both of these triggers. So again, so you can get a little bit of a hands-on comparison. But yeah, this I've had no problems at all with the Geiseles. I found them to be very consistent and very smooth. I did have one of the match grade triggers, which I think was the SSAE, and I liked it so much that I actually had some friends of mine shoot it, and they all ended up buying one of their own as well. Extremely nice two-stage trigger, so if you're wanting to do any very accurate target shooting, for me it's really hard to beat that for the price. Now, speaking of price, these are listed at about $250 on these S3Gs. But you can typically find them for just under $200. You can often find them for just under $200 as of today, as of what I'm seeing online right now. Whenever you're watching this video in the future apocalyptic wasteland, you might not even be able to buy them. I don't know. Now, one tip I will have for buying these triggers, or really any triggers, is if you can, I very highly suggest waiting for a holiday sale to buy one. Typically Black Friday sales, you can often find the SSAEs and these triggers for well under $200, around $175 or so. And typically, if I've got a few triggers to buy out, I'll go ahead and buy 2 or 3 around the holidays and outfit a few rifles at the same time. But this trigger is very easy to keep on target. It's great for follow-up shots. It's very smooth, and depending on your own capabilities, you should be able to get the most use out of this for sure. And speaking of that, we'll go ahead and cut over to some shooting footage that I have of this that we took the last shooting trip out. This is my first shots out of the box with this S3G. I did also have a Brownells Geissele rapid fire trigger. Actually, it's in one of my 9mm. Also a very nice trigger and worked really well, except they included a 3.5 pound trigger, or 3.5 power spring set, and with the 3.5 power spring set, I was actually getting a lot of hammer follow even when slow firing because I was feathering the trigger too much. I haven't had that issue with the S3G. The reset is extremely positive, like I mentioned before, and it's to the point that I actually tried to bump fire with it and could not bump fire with it. So again, you can see how much that kicks out. So my hands look filthy right now because I've been out painting as well. So yeah, we'll cut over to some shooting footage and show you that here in a second. I also have on the table this ATI 1911 45. I'm not actually doing anything with this. I was just shooting it earlier, so it just happens to be on the table in case anybody notices. This was a pretty cheap 1911 to 45, and it works well. So there's my review on it. It works well. It's a 1911. There you go. End of review. All right, we'll go ahead and cut over to some shooting, and then whenever we come back, I'll talk about the Spikes battle trigger.
BRN 601 with the Geissele trigger.
Interesting, it's faster for me just pulling the trigger than it is.
Yeah, also it's raining brass right over the camera here.
No brass deflector.
Yeah,
or steel
trust
deflector
me,
for that matter.
Me and the camera both noticed. BRN 601.
So a lot of people have pointed out that they see me shooting occasionally with my middle finger, as you can see here that I'm showing you. But that's really only for bump firing. With this Geissele trigger, the reset was a little longer to make it wasn't as easy to bump fire with. So I'm just going to shoot it like a human being.
A lame human being.
It's pretty fast though.
You didn't get me with any brass that time.
Damn.
I know.
Wasn't that fun? Anyway, this is my Colt LE6920 US SOCOM. This is a marked M4A1. It's not really an M4A1. It's a civilian version, civilian clone that Colt actually made for that purpose. In that carbine being an acceptable English pronunciation, by the way, don't at me, is this Spikes battle trigger. Now the battle trigger is a lot heavier and a little grittier, quite a bit grittier, than the Geissele rapid fire. And these are all relative terms, but I just called that a Geissele rapid fire instead of the Geissele S3G, and it is the S3G. But it is a little bit heavier and a little bit grittier, like I said, but the trade-off is the Spikes version has a advertised retail, a list retail of $59, as opposed to the Geissele advertised retail of $250. Now, again, those prices vary somewhat depending on when you're buying and who you're buying from, but that's a pretty good ballpark. The Colt M4 that you're seeing before you had about an 8-pound trigger and was very gritty and very heavy. Now the Spikes battle trigger, again at $59.99, has an advertised pull weight of 6 pounds. Now I swapped the springs out and put in JP Enterprises Enhanced Reliability springs. I call those Enhanced Reliability because you still get a harder ignition and more consistency as far as the reset goes. And they advertised you can reduce as much as 4.5 pounds. That reduced this battle trigger from 6 pounds to about 4 3/4. It varies sometimes between 4.5 and 5, but it's pretty well within 4 3/4. So not at all a bad trigger. Like I said, it's definitely grittier than the Geissele, but not near as gritty and not near as heavy as the M4 trigger. The reason that is because this is nickel boron plated, so that smooths the trigger out a lot. Now I have done my own trigger jobs where I've basically stoned and polished the stock triggers and then put the Enhanced Reliability springs in and been able to get 3.5 pound triggers. But the problem with me doing those is I am no expert and they're not consistent. So one might be 3.5, one might be 4, and they seem to break at different times and so on and so forth. So for me, with this being a rifle that I consider to be a go-to rifle, I wanted to have the consistency and reliability that essentially a smoothed out stock trigger would provide. Now I've never had any problems with the Geissele. That's, I'm not saying that those are unreliable at all, but with a very light trigger with 3.5 pounds, the general understanding is that if you the lighter trigger you have, the more likely you are to have things like double fires, hammer follow, and so on and so forth. So things that might not be detrimental in a competition situation, but with a carbine that you might be relying on to save your life, you want to have that consistency and reliability, and that basically that peace of mind to know that when you pull the trigger, it's more than likely going to fire. So Neither one of these triggers are intended for long-range competition. The S3G specifically, the literature on that mentions that it is not to be used for long-range match shooting. It's definitely intended for competition, like 3-gun competition, but long-range match shooting or duty use. And that, again, is because it is a very light single stage. For match accuracy, you're probably going to be better off with a 2-stage trigger, like the SSAE. But if you need something that is consistent and reliable, I think the Spikes Tactical version is actually a good alternative to just the stock AR trigger. And I think the S3G is a great range trigger or competition, 3-gun trigger. So it seems well suited to that. But yeah, quick, like I said, apples to oranges comparison on these two triggers. Again, they're at opposite ends of the price range, so depending on what your need is, my dog's drinking water, then you might prefer one or the other, but I don't think either are a bad option. Again, you certainly have the option of stoning and polishing your own triggers. If you are not familiar with doing that, and that's not something that you're adept at doing, there's a good chance that whenever you start to do that, you're probably going to ruin a trigger, or at the very least make it very inconsistent. So this takes some of the guesswork by just buying one that's effectively already pretty well polished. So anyway, this is Jay. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments below. And if you like this type of content, my dog's still drinking water, please click subscribe and click like, and be sure to check out our backlog. I reverse those, but that's okay. I'm about to go anyway. And hopefully we will catch you again next time with more interesting content.